Kathleen McNamee of ESPN is with us. Good morning, Kathleen.
Morning, guys. How are you?
Good. Are you sharing those levels of confidence ahead of Luxembourg?
Yeah, I think so. I think what really surprised me about Wednesday night was it felt like despite it not being the squad that Kenny was working with from the start, it felt like the first time he actually took control of the situation, kind of played the players he wanted to play with what he had. And that was really nice and really exciting to play. But I also think going into tomorrow, there's a far different expectation on this team. Yes, on Wednesday, we just had to score. That was it. And everyone would have been happy. Would have been like, a goal, great. Tomorrow, I think that we will want to see a lot more from that system. We'll want to have seen some of the cracks ironed out. And also, for me, keeping a clean sheet as well would be absolutely amazing, considering if we do want to possibly look at qualifying out of this, I think it's pretty important.
For me, it's been a situation where previous managements have struggled in the games that maybe they should have been winning consistently. I've mentioned so many times this week, Georgia being that one example in the last campaign. Do you get the sense early on from the Stephen Kenny era that they will be able to put those teams to the sword a little bit easier?
I think so. I think what we showed the other day was that we are changing up how we play in the terms of it's not just hoofing the ball down to the front and hoping that someone will get on the end of it. There's a bit more of a system. There's a bit more creativity going into it. I think possibly the team he employed on Wednesday might work even better on Saturday, in the sense that the likes of Doherty and Coleman, who you'd kind of want to get up a bit forward but didn't have that opportunity to do so because they were just so busy trying to hold back Serbia, they might have more opportunity to do that against a team like Luxembourg. And I think if he can show that, especially because there's been so much debate about having Coleman and Doherty in the same team, and also see a bit more from our front lads, then yeah, definitely it's the sort of game that he needs to be able to prove it. And I think if he does prove that, like you said, where other managers have failed with teams like Georgia, it will go a long way in kind of satisfying a lot of people as to whether he's doing what he should be doing with the team at this point.
There's loads of other things we want to get into as well, Kathleen. We want to get stuck into the new WSL deal, your top 50 list, which is getting widespread acclaim this week. Just before that, though, just sticking with Ireland for the time being, the Denmark and Belgium games announced this week for Vera Pauw's team. How much of a barometer are these opposition going to be ahead of the World Cup qualification campaign?
It's going to be tough. I mean, they're I think 14th and 17th respectively, and obviously we're 31st. So they're definitely competitive teams. Denmark have the likes of Pernille Harder, who is one of the best players in Europe at the moment. I think if we can go to these games and show the sort of skill that we did and the determination in games like Germany, even though we didn't get the result in those, if we can get their scoring down, show that we're setting up well, I think that will be a good barometer for our success, because these teams are a lot more accomplished than we are at this point. But I also think it's a good opportunity as well for Paul to show. She very much came in and had that whole qualification period and had to just kind of run with it. But I think it will be a nice opportunity for her to show what she has kind of developed since then for the team. And I know some players were kind of annoyed at the fact that there wasn't more games in the last international break for the Irish team. So I think this one's going to be really important for seeing what new players are coming through that squad, who might be beneficial for us in the long term, and also who's going to be the ones that are coming up behind the Katie McCabe's and the Denise O'Sullivans of the team.
Yeah, and is there going to be a big turnover, do you feel?
I don't think there's going to be massive at this moment in time, purely just because I think so many of our core squad are still performing quite well. Obviously, we saw in the last campaign players like Grace Maloney break through, who was really great for us in goal and has been doing great stuff for Reading as well, just signed a new deal. So I'm really excited to see how players like her get on in this squad. And then obviously you have the likes of Stephanie Roach and Claire Shine returning, which is really nice as well to see them back in a camp and just competing and being around those players. So I think it'll be good, and I think it'll be an interesting test. If we come out of this with 2 losses, but they're not necessarily massive losses, I would be pretty happy if I can see some sort of system that Paul is setting up, or some sort of plan for how she intends to approach things going forward.
For sure. Let's talk club football then. The FA announcing today, or this week I should say, a landmark multi-million-pound deal with Sky Sports at the BBC for broadcast rights to the WSL. It's going to be £8 million per year. I saw Football 365 describe it as a quarter of a Joe Linton. But at the same time, the big thing is the BBC, for me, the fact that the continuation of certain aspects of football being on free to air, and also, I guess, as well, even though it's going to be behind a paywall, just the attention that Sky Sports tends to pay when it comes to building a sport.
Yeah, I think it's actually really hard to like overestimate how massive a deal this is for women's football and the Women's Super League. Like, the FA were saying during the week that this is the biggest broadcast deal for any women's league in the world, like taking into account the likes of WNBA and WSL in the US, where like obviously there's a lot more funding in the US than there ever has been in Europe. So, and like you said, it's the fact that these matches are going to be available. There's going to be big money put behind them. There's going to be production values put behind them. Like, generally, it's just a really, really exciting time for the game.
Yeah, for sure. Like, when it comes to that, then I guess the aspect of this deal, the aspect of it being pushed out between two different channels, like, is there any early indications on how much of this is going to be free to air, how much of this is going to be behind a paywall, or have they yet to iron that out?
Yeah, so they've already announced that. So I think it's going to be approximately 44 games across Sky Sports, and that's including like their main channels and their kind of subsidiary ones. And then there's going to be, I think, 22 on BBC, with minimum 18 of those on like BBC One, BBC Two, so not the red button channels.
Right.
So like it very much is getting prime time viewing, and like Sky Sports have already put out a call for a production manager. And that's the other thing that feeds into all this. It's not just important for the teams, because like you said, £7 or £8 million, it's not a lot of money, and like that's not going to make a dent in someone like Chelsea's wage bill. But it's that whole idea of who they're being seen on the television every single week. It'll help some of the lower clubs that are coming up into it. It'll help the journalists, the broadcasters who have been working this beat for years, possibly without being able to get onto those big platforms, and maybe even show their skills to then go on to do different bits as well. So the feed down into the entire industry that this could have is absolutely massive. And it's just really, like, I'm excited by the fact that I don't need to go hunting for footage of players. Like you mentioned the top 50 list we did, trying to actually find enough content around the players we were talking about was quite difficult at times, because depending on where you were, being able to watch the games is just a problem in and of itself. So I think it's really exciting for the Women's Super League and set such a good bar for other leagues as well.
We're coming back to the top 50 list, by the way, Kathleen. Don't worry about that. There's plenty of controversy there we need to pin you down on. The piece, I wanted to tease out a little bit more with you just around that point about the greater impact in the industry in general. There was a really good piece with Suzanne Rack, who's a football writer with The Guardian, during the week, about the deal and how deeply it impacted on her. Talked about the waves of emotion about it, the whole thing coming to fruition. And I sort of wondered myself whether it was actually too lofty an ambition to think that something like that could have a spill-down effect and a wider impact on women's sport in general. But you're clearly feeling that it will have.
I think so, because I think it sets a bar, and it sets a bar for coverage. And if it's a case where, you know, Sky Sports and BBC are showing these games every single weekend, they have montages. One of the things that we talk about a lot in women's football is the lack of actual analysts of the games themselves. So we do a lot of talking around the issues and the equality, but very little of our time is spent on the build-up, on the player formations, on the stats. And both BBC and Sky Sports have committed to doing more of that. So even that in and of itself is really exciting, to actually be able to go out and just talk about these players as footballers, to talk about the games as football games, rather than possibly constantly having to say, well, the pitch wasn't great quality, or they should have been given a better opportunity in this part, or, you know, they need more money. This is sort of setting the bar for other sports to look at and go, well, if we treat these people like this, why are we treating these other players differently? So for me, that's what I think is going to be the biggest takeaway from this. It's just going to set a bar. And once that bar is set, it's very hard to go back to anything different.
Yeah, hopefully the dam that bursts and has that impact across the board. Vera Pauw was talking last month as well, Kathleen, just when she signed that new contract, she was asked about the idea of equal pay. And interestingly, she said at the time that we don't yet bring any money was bringing money in was her rationale, but we're maybe a bit away from it just yet. Is there any possibility of direct or indirect positive impact to football here with maybe broadcasters, sponsors are looking at that deal and thinking, actually, we're moving beyond tokenism now into a real sound sort of business footing?
Definitely. I think it was Abramovich said during the week, when was it this week or last week, in his interview with Forbes, that, you know, it's a smart business deal to get involved in women's sport at the moment. It's low investment for like possibly high returns in the coming years. And I think he is very right in that this is only something that's going to grow. It's only something that's going to get bigger. You can either like choose to jump on board now and actually have your investment mean something and get the money later, or you can jump on later and get the money. I don't think people will be complaining too much if people do jump on later just for the money prospect of it. But I think that the more that people see these players, the more that they know their names. You know, I always say this when I'm on here with you guys, but like, we've seen it here. We know so many more names because of campaigns like 2020. And like, there are girls that will go out, and boys that will buy jerseys with Katie McCabe's name on the back, or Denise O'Sullivan's, and like teams like the FAI are seeing the point in making a women's jersey and a men's jersey now. There has to be some sort of business reason for doing this. As much as we like to think that these companies are doing these things out of the goodness of their hearts, they're not. Most of the time, there has to be something in the future that they're seeing that they can profit off. So I definitely think that like there is an opportunity for that. And I think even now there is, like, you look at all the amount of sponsorships that are coming through for leagues, for teams. They're like growing every single day. I see more and more of them popping up in my Instagram when I look at players. And part of me is like, this is great, happy for you. And the other part of me is like, oh, the game's going, but it's just part of it at this point.
But kind of along that theme then, I guess, is this weekend in the WSL, you've obviously got Manchester United playing at Old Trafford. They're not doing that unless they realise that they can actually make money off bums on seats in Old Trafford at some point down the line.
Yeah, the Old Trafford one this weekend is interesting because I know when I saw it, I was like, this is a bit unusual time to do it, considering that you can't have those bums on seats. You know, those players can't have their family in the stands. And then also the fact is not being televised. And it's something that like Casey Stoney brought up yesterday in her press conference. And she was kind of saying, sometimes we're very short-sighted in how we approach these things, meaning, you know, MUTV can't show the game because they've already broadcast. I think it's 3 games they're allowed broadcast. No television places picked up on this because it seemed to be decided quite last minute, and they'd already picked their games for the weekend. So it's like these players are going to be out there in this amazing stadium. It's an amazing moment, especially when you consider how young this Manchester United team is, but no one's going to see it. So kind of what's the point? And obviously it'll be amazing for those players when they're out there, and I hope they like soak it up and a big deal is made of it for them. But it just does feel like a bit of a missed opportunity in the grand scheme of things, and possibly one that could have been more well thought out in advance. Again, I'm not privy to like the inner workings of how they actually came to the decision of playing at Old Trafford. But when you look at things like, you know, the North London Derby has been played at the Emirates and the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, that seems to be a lot more thought went into that a long way in ahead, because they knew that that was going to be a big game and a big event for the players and the fans and everything. So it's great. It's a great step, but it feels a little bit wasted on this weekend.
Sure. Yeah, I know what you mean. Right. On to the main event then. ESPN, I should say, published your top 50 players in the world. Which was the most contentious decision here? Which one had your Twitter mentions going the most wild?
I think I upset a lot of Chelsea and Fran Kirby fans with the list, which is fair. I have on record with ESPN that I thought she was ranked far too low as well. She was 12th and she could easily have been in the top 3. And I think like what she has done at Chelsea this season with Sam Kerr has just been amazing. Like their partnership, I kind of, whenever I try and explain it to people who maybe don't watch women's football all the time, it's like, take Harry Kane and Son, that it's them, but better, basically. The two of them are just goal scoring machines. Not only are they like assisting each other constantly, they're also helping out like everyone on that team, which is kind of, it's impressive to stand out in that Chelsea team because it is so stacked with talent. But yeah, definitely a lot of unhappy Fran Kirby fans. Also a lot of unhappy US women's national team fans. But I feel like they're also very hard to please in general and would just have any top 10 as just the full starting 11 of their team.
Yeah, three from the United States in the top 12 is what I counted, which I guess is good for the global game in general, that there's a good spread of talent there amongst the top dozen players. Just on that, in terms of the Chelsea players there, obviously Fran Kirby and Sam Kerr. Kerr comes in second in the list. The Arsenal fan inside me was like, why did Medema get pipped to second place there? So what was the thought process behind that decision?
So the way we did it was we actually had ballots come in from people inside ESPN and also outside ESPN, and we kept the final list very true to how all the ballots tallied, which means that there was a lot of different opinions flying around and a lot of different ideas on what makes a quality player. But for me personally, if I was looking at that, I would think that Medema has struggled this year because Arsenal have struggled. She's still like incredible. She is one of the top players in the world, but you can see her frustration on the pitch and you can see her frustration at the opportunities she is getting around her. Whereas a player like Sam Kerr is very much in her prime playing at the moment. You know, she looks confident. She is doing things around other parts of the pitch. She's not just scoring. I don't know if you saw a couple of weeks ago in the Continental Cup final, she did her famous black flip, which no one in England had seen in the last year. Everyone was actually on the edge of their seat waiting for it. And I think it shows how confident she is at the moment. So I think that's why, personally, I would say she slightly pips Medema. But again, when I was doing this list, I think if you're in the top 50, you're an incredible player. And these things are always so subjective. Like the list looks entirely different to the ballot I submitted. But at the same time, I have such huge respect for all the players that are on it. And I think it's just an exciting thing to have done. I mean, we've done a men's list for 5 years. This is the first time we've ever done a women's one. So even that in and of itself is just really nice.
Yeah, it's class. Just one last player I wanted to touch on was Caroline Graham Hansen, Barcelona, Norway star. I presume she was, I didn't see the game, I presume she was key to City getting walloped in the Champions League.
Yeah, definitely. She is incredible. She's one of those players who's just everywhere on the pitch. She's helping out in every single little move that's made. She is there. And I think what you really saw in the Manchester City game was just her vision is insane. The way she picks out passes, you don't see them yourself. And she suddenly does them and you're like, how did you spot that gap? Again, that's another player that definitely could have been a lot higher. Barcelona have won all 20 of their league games this year. Like, they're on an incredible run down there. And I think it showed as well against a team like Manchester City, who are second in the WSL, 2 points off Chelsea, who quite dominated our list, that Barcelona just so easily went through them like that. And it was because of players like her. I think she's really benefited from the likes of Hegerberg, like her not being around. And you can also see how she plied her trade in a team like Wolfsburg, where there's so many top players. Her role was linking them up together. So you have all these great strikers. You have the Pernilla Harders, the Eva Pejors. How do you bring them together? And she has perfected that role of being the assist maker and the link-up player. And her and Jenny Hermoso, the way they team up is just so good. It's so fun to watch.
Yeah, turns out Norway are going to be a force to be reckoned with no matter what World Cup you're watching next up. Kathleen, great stuff as ever. Thanks a million for taking the call.
No worries. Thanks, guys.